Welcome to HDG classes, and in today's class we will complete default arguments, which is again a very simple and easy topic. We have already completed the required arguments and keyword arguments. So if you haven't watched those videos, I will suggest you to watch those videos first and then move to this particular topic. So without wasting any time, let's move to this topic, default argument. Now, what is this default arguments? When we're going to define a function, if we have some parameters, and if those parameters have a default value, then we can say that that is a default parameter, and that's what default argument is. So we will be defining a function, and in that particular function we will be having some parameters, and now in this case some of the parameters will have a default value, but yes, there is a condition, there is a rule, and that condition is that a parameter cannot have a default value until and unless all the parameters appearing on its right have a default value. Now this particular statement may not be clear to you, but if I take an example, then definitely all these things will be clear to you. So it's better to take an example. Okay, so let me define a function def sum 5. So I am declaring 5 parameters a, b, c, d, e, and it will simply do the sum of these 5 parameters. Okay, now let me call this function sum 5 1 2 3 4 5. So the way I have called this particular function, the approach which I have used is the positional argument, and which we have already discussed in our last video. And if you haven't watched those videos, again it's my request to you, please go to my playlist. I will upload it I will give that particular link in my description box, and have a look to that particular topic, default, that required argument, and that particular keyword argument. Those things are very important. So the way I have passed the argument, the way I have called this particular function, I have used the positional argument. Now suppose I want to give a default value. Now I want to give a default value to this particular parameter b. Okay, now I want to give a default value to this particular parameter b, and let it be I want to give 0. But there is a condition, as I told you, there is a condition involved. And what is that condition? All the parameters, guys, try to listen it. All the parameters that is appearing on its right, all the parameters that is appearing on its right must have a default value. I hope this is clear to you. So that's the rule, that a parameter cannot have a default value until and unless all the parameters on its right have a default value. And if we follow that particular rule, then definitely we will be able to create a default parameter. Now, so let's create it. Let's create it, and so a. So let's give a default value, the parameter b, as 0. Now I have c, d, and e. Okay, now we need to check whether b have a parameter on its right, and it's yes. This particular parameter b have a parameter on its right, and that is c. So we need to give a default value again to this particular parameter c. So let's give it as 1. Okay, let's give it as 1. Now again we need to check whether this particular parameter c have a parameter on its right. Yes, again it's have a parameter on its right, and that is d. So we need to give a default value to this particular parameter d, and it can be any value. Now let's give it as 2. Now again we need to check whether this particular parameter d have a default value, have a parameter on its right, and yes, it's again have a parameter on its right, and that is e. So we need to give a default value to this particular parameter e. So let's give 3. Now we need to check again whether parameter e have a parameter on its right side, and yes, it's no, yeah, it's don't have any parameter. So Now it's correct. Now it's fully correct. Okay, so we need to check. If I give a value to a particular parameter, then I need to check whether that parameter have a parameter on its right. Means that particular parameter have a parameter on its right, and if yes, then we need to give a default value to that particular parameter too. And if we don't follow this particular rule, then we will be getting an syntax error. So this is a syntactical error. So we need to follow those syntax in order to create a default parameter, and that's all. So what is the advantage of having this default parameter? That I can simply skip those values. Means I can simply skip those values while calling this function, those parameters value while calling the function. So I don't need to give any value to those parameters if they have a default value. So simply I can pass someone. So what will happen in this case, that this one will go to this particular parameter A. Now suppose if I give 5 parameters, 2, 3, 4, 5, then what will happen to this default value? It will simply get overwritten. What? So since B have a default value 0, and I have passed a argument 2 to this particular parameter B, then what will happen? 0 will get overwritten by 2. So now parameter B will have value as 2, not as 0. It will not have the default value 0. It will now have the value which is being passed during the function call. Clear? I hope this is fully clear to you. But yes, we will try to implement all this thing in my computer. So let's move to the practical class. So in order to create a 110% or more, to create a 110 or more percent of clarification about this particular topic. So let's move to it. So guys, let's start our practical class. So let me first define a function def sum 5, and let me declare 5 parameters a, b, c, d, e. Fine. And let me print their sum. So sum is a plus b plus c plus d plus e. Fine. Now let me call this function with some values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fine. Now it's let's print the values of this parameter also. So it will help us to understand what values this parameter have get. So a equals to a, print b equals to b, print c equals to c, fine, print d equals to d, and print e equals to e. Fine, done, complete. So why I have written this particular print statement? In order to show you what values this parameters now having. So now let's create a default value for this particular parameter b, and let it be as 0. So 0, and now let's execute it. See guys, I got an error, and it's a syntax error, guys. So means it's a grammatical mistake. So we need to, as I've told you, we need to check. Okay, let me cross it. Okay, fine. Now we need to check whether this particular parameter b has a default parameter, has a parameter on its right, and yes, it has a. So we need to give a default value. It can be any value, but yes, we need to give correct values. Why? Because we need, as I told you, that a function need to perform a specific task. So in this case, this particular function is performing the summation task. So it is expected that this particular parameter will have a number. So let me give a default value 1 to this particular parameter, and now again execute it, and see, again I am getting the same syntax error. Non-default argument follows default arguments. So why this syntax error is arising? And it's just because that we have seen that not all the parameters on its right. Whose parameter? This c has a parameter on its right, which is d, and it don't have any default value. So we need to give a default value to this parameter also. So let's give as 2, and now again we will get the same error if we execute it. Why? Because D also have a parameter on its right, so this parameter E need to have a default value, so let's give it as 3. Fine. Now let me remove this particular thing and let me call this function with 1. Why? Because this particular parameter A don't have any default value, so this one need to be passed. If we don't pass it, then again we will get an error that positional argument A don't have any value. So since it don't have any default value, so we need to pass a value while calling this function. So we are passing now right now as 1, and let me execute it. So int object is not iterable, line number 9. Let's see what happened. At line number 9, int object is not iterable. Okay, fine. Sorry, the name of the function is sum5, and I am using a inbuilt function sum. So sorry for that. So let me write it as sum5. Sum is an inbuilt function, so that's why I have changed its name to sum5, and that's the reason I was getting an error. And yes, we will discuss this particular function also in one of our video. So yes, now let's execute it and see I am getting the output as 7, and A is now having a value of 1. Why? Because we have passed 1 while calling the function. And now see that B is having value 0, C is having a value of 1. Why? Because its default value is 1. D is having a value of 2, and E is having a value of 3, and that's what is coming. Sorry, yeah, so that's what is coming. C is having a value of 3, and from where it is getting that particular value, and it's E's default value, C's default value, D's default value, B's default value, and the sum is 7. Now as I've told you that we can also override this default value, and how we can do that, we need to pass the values for all the argument. So let me do that thing. Okay, fine, and let me cross this. Okay, fine. Okay, let's give some different values while calling the function. So 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. Fine. Now let me call this function and see the sum is 150. But try to notice one thing, that the default value is get overwritten by the value which we have passed during the function call, and that's what I want to tell you. So default values get overwritten only when we passed a value to those parameters, otherwise it will take the default value. And that's solved, and the class ends here. So I hope you have understood all the topics, all the discussion of this class. You have make notes also, but again it's my suggestion to you, please try to practice more and more questions. And yes, I will also do questions after the completion of this chapter. But yes, the important thing is that since it's a practical based chapter, so please guys try to do more and more practicals, so you will get a huge level of concept by practicing more and more question. And yes, if you have any doubt, comment section is for you. Feel free to post your questions. I will definitely try to solve all those questions. So that's all for today, and we will meet you in the next class. Thank you very much.